McLaren is holding back on a big upgrade. Ferrari has updated their technical team, and Red Bull is losing more and more important people. Do consider subscribing to the channel. Now let's get straight into the latest F1 news. Updating the W15 at the Belgian Grand Prix, Andrew Chauvelin says they weren't expecting massive gains from the package, but after Monza, they need to assess whether it's changed the handling characteristics of the car. Lewis Hamilton lamented Mercedes' lack of pace at the Italian Grand Prix, the third event in which they were running the new floor and diffuser that they introduced at Spa. Telling the media, including PlanetF1.com, that Mercedes just didn't have the pace, he explained that they had more degradation, and just generally, we were lacking 1 or 2 tenths in the race. 5th and 7th with Hamilton ahead of George Russell, it marked Mercedes' second race off the podium, with the team having previously recorded a 6-race streak that included 3 victories. The positive in all this is that Chauvelin, Mercedes' trackside engineering director, says the upgrades have increased the car's overall downforce. Over the last 3 races, we've done various compares of the packages, and principally comparing the floor, and what we are confident in is that it's generating the load that we expect, he said Mercedes' post-Monza debrief. How do we know that? We're measuring the forces that it generates on the road through the suspension. We are also looking at the pressures that are generated across the car, and we can correlate that with what we're seeing in the wind tunnel, and that allows us to get a pretty decent read on whether it's doing what we expect. It's important to note this was not a very large gain that we were expecting. It was quite a small package that we introduced, but we're confident that it is generating that load. It has, however, left them with one big question to answer. Have the updates changed the characteristics of the car? Although Hamilton said the car had been feeling so much better on Saturday at Monza, he uncharacteristically made several mistakes in qualifying that cost him tenths. George Russell, meanwhile, called for changes as Mercedes didn't have the pace to fight with Ferrari and McLaren in the Grand Prix. Chauvelin concedes Mercedes now have to ask the difficult question of whether there's anything subtle in the handling characteristics that this package might be doing that we haven't anticipated. And that's quite difficult to assess because the car will perform differently track to track. Some tracks it's been working very well. Other circuits we've struggled with the balance of the car regardless of the aerodynamic spec, and yes, the last 2 races haven't been as good as some of the ones that preceded it. It may well be that's just the normal variation from track to track, but that's what we're going to be looking at over the next few days, and on top of that, there are other updates that we're bringing into the system. There's quite a lot for us to consider, but we do have a lot of data now, and we can go off and use the next few days to learn what we can from that. Mercedes remained 4th in the Constructors' Championship with 292 points on the board, 115 behind third-placed Ferrari. The news has been grim for Red Bull Racing's Formula One title challenge, and it doesn't look like things will be changing anytime soon. Speaking to media after the Italian Grand Prix, Dr. Helmut Marko pinpointed the United States Grand Prix as being the best hope Red Bull has to turn the tides, while Max Verstappen referred to the RB20 as a monster. Red Bull Racing's RB20 hasn't lived up to the expectations of the once dominant team, and after the Italian Grand Prix, Max Verstappen didn't shy away from offering a critical take on what's gone wrong with the team. When asked if the break between the Singapore Grand Prix and the United States Grand Prix will provide the team with a shot at repairing Red Bull's championship hopes by improving the car, Verstappen was skeptical. It doesn't matter how many weeks, Verstappen told assembled media, including PlanetF1.com. We have to just keep pushing and work flat out. There's no excuse. Further, he was asked if he felt the team's loss of Adrian Newey as a designer at all factored into the RB20's seemingly constant struggles. I've always said I would have liked for Adrian to stay, Verstappen said. Always. But it's not about that now because last year we had a great car, which was the most dominant car ever, and we basically turned it into a monster. So we have to turn it around. At least one person on the Red Bull Racing team has some confidence in the evolution of the team and its car. Speaking to De Telegraaf, Dr. Helmut Marko acknowledged that, after the Italian Grand Prix, Verstappen finally seemed able to pinpoint some specific issues with the RB20, which is the first step toward solving those issues. Max recognized on Saturday where the weakness of the car is, Dr. Marko told De Telegraaf. Together with the engineers, a decision was made on how to improve the car and make it competitive again. We just have to figure out which part made the car worse. If we knew that, we wouldn't be in this situation. But in Formula One, changes don't happen overnight. Marco believes the Red Bull team will introduce updates or changes for the upcoming Azerbaijan Grand Prix, but that it wouldn't be realistic to expect the car to be competitive until the United States Grand Prix. That means the events in both Baku and Singapore are expected to be grim, and that Red Bull will only have 6 of the remaining 8 races left to secure both the drivers' and constructors' championships. Max Verstappen still leads the Formula One championship with 303 points compared to Lando Norris's 241, but a 62-point gap is easily surmountable over the course of 8 races. Even worse, Red Bull Racing's lead in the Constructors' Championship has been whittled down to a mere 8 points, largely as a result of Sergio Perez's immensely challenging 2024 season. While it may take Norris a few races to overtake Verstappen in the WDC standings, McLaren could easily usurp Red Bull in the WCC at Baku. But that all still depends on Red Bull's ability to transform its RB20 monster into a more easily controlled beast. And if 2024 has taught us anything, it's that prospect is more challenging than ever before. Lando Norris won't win this year's world title because he makes too many mistakes, but that doesn't mean McLaren should not throw their full support behind him on the off chance he can beat Max Verstappen. This season, for the first time in more than a decade, McLaren are mathematically in the race for the world title, and with both Norris and Oscar Piastri. With 8 race weekends remaining, 3 of which are sprints, there are 238 points in play, and Verstappen's lead is 62 points up on Norris with Piastri, a further 44 behind. It's a long shot, but it's a better shot than McLaren have had in previous years. And yet the Woking team surprised rival team bosses and pundits alike when they refused to use team orders at the Italian Grand Prix to favor Norris. Although team boss Andrea Stella later admitted the Briton is in the best position from a numbers point of view to challenge the reigning world champion, McLaren allowed Piastri to take 3 points away from his teammate. Van der Garde says that cannot happen again. Zak Brown must now make this call. He must say internally, now we have the chance. There are 8 more races, and this is the chance to become champion, the former F1 driver told DRS, the race show. However, even if McLaren do just that, Van der Garde reckons Verstappen will still win this year's driver's title. Betting on the Dutchman with his 62-point lead and wealth of experience in wrapping up championships, the former F1 driver reckons Norris has made 2 mistakes this season and will continue to make more in the final races. That won't work. It really won't work, he continued. They'll make too many mistakes. Norris will also make too many mistakes. They'll win the Constructors' Championship, but Norris won't become world champion. Max Verstappen will become world champion this season, purely and simply because he has the experience and talent to achieve that. Norris has never been a world champion. Oscar Piastri will have a really hard time becoming champion this year, but Norris does have a chance. This year, Norris has the best credentials to make it difficult for Max. If it really comes down to the last race and he has to pull out all the stops, then Max will win 100%. McLaren have a realistic chance of winning the team's trophy, having closed the gap to Red Bull to just 8 points with their double podium at Monza. Ferrari reportedly withdrew from the race to hire Adrian Newey to avoid a bidding war after Aston Martin made a more lucrative offer. PlanetF1.com understands Newey's move to the Aston Martin will be announced in the build-up to next week's Azerbaijan Grand Prix. While Newey has been heavily linked to Aston Martin in recent months, it was initially Ferrari who were leading the running when the design guru announced in May that he will leave Red Bull in early 2025. From a visit to Maranello to a private meeting at an airport, Ferrari courted Newey with team boss Fred Vasseur's couple of names with 5 letters, cryptic tease back in July, seen as a hint that 25-time championship winner would be the one to replace the Aston Martin-bound Enrico Cardile, who was formerly Ferrari's head of their chassis design department. But 6 weeks later, it's Aston Martin who are expected to announce the 65-year-old and do so in the coming days after Ferrari withdrew from the negotiations. While it was suggested that the right to veto the hiring of technical staff played more of a role in that than finances, Motorsport.com claims it was actually about money, with Ferrari wanting to avoid a bidding war. Although Vasseur is said to have secured the budget to sign Newey, after Aston Martin made him an offer that's believed to be in the region of 100 million, they walked away from the table. Ferrari have instead named former Mercedes man Loic Serra as their new technical director, a role he will take up when he joins the team in October after his gardening leave. Scuderia Ferrari HP announces that it has entrusted the role of technical director chassis to Loic Serra, the team announced. As previously announced, the French engineer born in 1972 will join the team on 1st of October. Loic, in this new role, will report directly to the team principal, Fred Vasseur. Aston Martin, meanwhile, will hold a press conference on September 10th, in which they're expected to announce NEWEY. Eddie Jordan, NEWEY's manager and longtime friend, declined to comment on the matter, telling the BBC, "I am not prepared to answer. I will not be forthcoming in any shape or form." McLaren are now the undisputed benchmark in F1. The MCL38 has been the fastest car since early May, whilst recent upgrades in Zandvoort delivered another step forward. However, Ferrari's triumph in Monza is a reminder that Andrea Stella's team cannot take anything for granted. Another emerging dilemma for McLaren is they are uncertain about implementing their next updates. The updates McLaren introduced immediately after the summer break were significant. They unlocked a few tenths per lap for the Woking-based team, increasing the gap to the struggling Red Bull and Max Verstappen's RB20. However, the team's development strategy was not to rely on a single update. Instead, McLaren's intention was to introduce more improvements progressively in the second half of 2024. If well executed, this would ensure steady progress and increase their advantage over the other frontrunners. By extension, this would give Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri enough margin for error to secure victories more regularly. With that said, a problem is emerging for the British outfit. As Aston Martin, Mercedes, and Ferrari have experienced firsthand, bringing updates with this generation of cars is hugely risky. One mistake can destabilize a car's aerodynamic platform and send a team into a negative spiral. Ferrari's victory in Monza was so important because it was the first time they introduced the upgrades intended to correct the issues created by their Spanish GP package. Fred Vasseur's team spent 3 months working to undo this mistake. Considering they are only 39 points behind Red Bull in the standings, the Italian squad could be leading the championship if they'd avoided this unforced error. This is the cautionary tale that has informed McLaren's decision to hesitate with their next package. The factory in Woking, as reported by Motorsport.com, has more updates ready to bring to the track. However, team principal Andrea Stella admits they are nervous about potentially destabilizing the MCL38. The next relevant upgrade, not as big as Miami, was in Zandvoort, and it didn't involve the full floor. It was just a detail. There's a reason why we haven't brought some upgrades. Because we see that, had we pressed the go button, we might have had some doubts when these parts were tested full scale on the real car. So we are taking our time to convince ourselves that the development is mature enough to be taken trackside. Until now, McLaren have been faultless with their development program in 2024. Upgrades have worked precisely as intended, with the team's correlation from the wind tunnel to the track proving extremely accurate. Because of this success, Norris and Piastri have a car capable of winning races at every circuit. However, this does not guarantee that all future upgrades will improve. Despite the criticism surrounding Red Bull, it is not uncommon for teams to hit a development ceiling. McLaren are desperate to avoid this scenario, which is why their progress could plateau for the next 2 race weekends. For now, the British team will focus on optimizing their package and avoid dropping any more points with operational errors. The last 8 months have been extremely turbulent for Red Bull. They began the year with off-track controversies surrounding Christian Horner, only for their on-track decline to take center stage immediately after. According to Helmut Marko, the defending champions have lost key personnel in 2024. Red Bull are entering a crucial period, both regarding their current championship aspirations and long-term trajectory. There is no shortage of discussion about the RB20's decline, with Max Verstappen ringing the alarm about its poor handling characteristics. Upgrades are still being researched and designed in the factory, meaning the RB20 will likely receive no new components until round 19 of the season in Coda. This means the next 2 races in Baku and Singapore, 2 atypical street circuits, could become a question of damage limitation for the defending champions. Putting aside Red Bull's lack of pace, the last 12 months have seen a series of senior engineers leave Milton Keynes. Adrian Newey is the most notable exit, but others, like Rob Marshall's move to McLaren, are also taking place. Helmut Marko was asked about the situation at Red Bull, including the impact of the controversies surrounding Christian Horner. "It's clear that something like that doesn't help," he told OE24. but ultimately it's not directly related to our technical problems, but to the departure of important people. If certain employees want to change and receive a good offer or see a new opportunity, then they take it. As Toto Wolff explained at the Italian GP, it would be premature to write off a Red Bull recovery. The last 12 months have seen F1's pecking order change dramatically, especially as the margins at the front have narrowed. McLaren's development trajectory is undoubtedly impressive, but the Austrian squad can recover their deficit with a relatively small step forward. The question is whether Red Bull have fundamentally understood what is holding them back. After all, the RB20 has been affected by the same limiting factors for several months. With Ferrari and Mercedes also contenders, one bad weekend can see Max Verstappen drop outside of the top 5, which can have significant consequences in the championship. In combination with these short-term concerns, Red Bull must ensure they avoid any further internal instability, especially given Toto Wolff's persistent interest in signing the Dutchman. The Ferrari Formula One team has appointed former Mercedes engineer Loic Serra as its new technical director on the chassis side. Ferrari had initially poached Serra from Mercedes in the summer of last year, but due to an extended gardening period, Serra is yet to start working at Maranello. Once he joins the team on 1st October, the Frenchman will become Ferrari's new chassis technical director, taking over the role vacated by Enrico Cardile in July. Team boss Fred Vasseur briefly took up the position on an interim basis before working on a technical restructuring, which has now fully taken shape. In a press statement on Thursday, Ferrari outlined its refreshed technical lineup on the chassis side. In this new role, Serra will report directly to the team principal, Fred Vasseur. Serra will therefore be responsible for the following departments: Chassis Project Engineering, headed up by Fabio Montecchi; Vehicle Performance, headed up by Marco Adorno; Aerodynamics, headed up by Diego Tondi; Track Engineering, headed up by Matteo Tognanali; and Chassis Operations, headed up by Diego Ioverno, who also continues in the role of sporting director. Enrico Gualtieri remains in place and the technical director on the power unit side, overseeing the development of its new engines for the 2026 rules. Cardile left Ferrari in July after accepting a senior technical position within Aston Martin, where he will join up with technical director Dan Fellows once his gardening leave period ends. It is also widely expected former Red Bull design guru Adrian Newey will join the Silverstone team as a consultant, with an announcement understood to be imminent. At Ferrari, Serra will be reunited with 7-time world champion Lewis Hamilton, who joins the team ahead of the 2025 season. The announcement comes in the wake of an upturn in form for the Scuderia after struggling with its latest floor upgrades before the summer break. Charles Leclerc took a surprise podium at Zandvoort's Dutch Grand Prix before gifting Ferrari an emotional win in front of its tifosi at last weekend's Italian Grand Prix in Monza. Despite McLaren taking over the mantle from Red Bull as the fastest team in F1 right now, Ferrari is hot on the heels of both teams in the Constructors' Championship, coming to within 39 points of leader Red Bull and 31 points behind McLaren. That's it for today's video. I'll see you around.